Mickey sighed as he rubbed the back of his sore neck. It had been a long week at the spaceport, and he was greatly looking forward to some downtime over the weekend. In fact, he had the perfect place in mind, and he smiled as he saw the garishly lit neon holo adverts on the front of the building at the corner of the street ahead. The suggestive signage promised sweet dreams and the temporary satisfaction that only carnal activities could bring. The brightly lit sign showing the name Twin Globes, where the O and B of the second word had been tactically replaced with 4 plump breasts. It had always elicited a chuckle from him, and he supposed that must have been the selling point after all. Mickey bounced on the balls of his feet as he looked both ways down the darkened street, and then ran across without waiting for the lights to change. He could hardly wait to see Cinder again. Tonight was the night. He could feel it in his heart. The man huffed as he reached the other side of the street. He was of medium height and had the powerful build of a weightlifter, but he had never been particularly agile. He passed a pale-skinned hand through his scruffy, void of white hair, and then set his wide shoulders determinedly. He sidled up to the front door. Sometimes there was a line waiting for entry, but not tonight. It was still a bit early for the main shows, and the wide Zion that stood at the front door eyed him dispassionately with their 4 compound eyes. The alien was the globe's main bouncer, a truly humorless creature with eyes only for the silver and blue that its owner, Malkanek, provided. He nodded to the heavy carapaced alien. "Good afternoon, Guard." Guard in turn rumbled, "Oh, it's you, the synth lover." Mickey shrugged. They weren't wrong. "Let me in, please." Guard grumbled and then, after a moment of hesitance, stepped to the side. Mickey smacked them on one of their upper arms as he walked by. "Much obliged, Guard." Guard said nothing, just watched him without turning that blunt head. Black as pitch eyes watching for any signs of trouble. He looked around the open space as he entered the building with intent, his eyes glossing over the sleek forms of Slavev aqua dancers, clad only in luminescent body paint, as they twisted and writhed around each other in their aquatic stage tanks. Over the dangerously live forms of the nymph danseurs, as they performed mock death bouts to the whistling of impassioned onlookers. Across the deific form of a female celestial, with her flowing head tendrils of ever-changing colours, as she twirled iridescent fans that refracted her glowing locks into a phantasmagoria of pleasant rainbow sparkles. No, he only had eyes for one. There, on the far side of the room where the majority of the patrons seemed to ignore, were several alluring figures. Mickey walked over quickly, but was stopped by a large, shaggy-furred figure that stood so tall he had to crane his neck to see his features. It was Malkanek. The tall, pouring woman seemed to shake her long-snouted head. Twin beady eyes boring into his own as she rasped loudly, "Mr. Dalek, back again so soon?" He nodded, leaning slightly to peer around her body. He felt a tap on the top of his head. One of the woman's long and spindly arms had extended from the shroud of her shaggy white fur as she chided him. "Don't think I don't know what you are doing here." Mickey felt his blood freeze. Shit, he swore internally. Had she discovered his efforts with Cinder? He had thought himself too careful for that. He relaxed a moment later as the woman continued on, her apparent concern more to do with his payment than the true reason for his perseverance. He shrugged as she told him to stop sneaking by the front desk, and accepted his assistant's Osmir transfer before shambling away. That had been too close. Mickey turned to glance around. The coast was clear and he had paid his entry fee. Now, time to go and see his vexation. He walked across the darkened room, the pulse pounding music doing little to settle his nerves. Today would be the day. He had already decided. He would succeed, or he would concede. He walked to the swaying simps and looked around. While there were many beauties on display, they were all the newer Dominar models, not the one he sought. All at once he felt a hand press into the small of his back, as an inhumanely melodic voice spoke close to his ear. "Hello, Mickey." She had been referring to him by name for a few weeks now, not something that was in her base programming, but it was decidedly a good sign. Shivers ran down his spine as the hand drifted up to his shoulder and he spun around, the arm remaining in contact as it draped over his shoulder and pulled him close to the figure that had snuck up behind him. His breath caught in his chest as his eyes alighted on her, his muse, his belle. Cinder stood tall, slightly taller than him, in fact. She had the body of Venus with perfectly caramel skin that looked as if it had been kissed by the twin suns of Celestia Prime. Her fiery red hair framed her almond face. That dainty nose and perfect lips drew his gaze as she leaned in for a kiss without him asking. Her pillowy lips met his, and he looked into her eyes that shone like galaxies. The moment lasted for just a second, the kiss one of greeting rather than one to fuel the flames of passion. Nevertheless, it lit a fire in his belly, and he found himself shaking slightly from the intensity of the adrenaline that spiked in his heart at her demure touch. "Hello, Cinder," he said, his face splitting into a wide, boyish grin. It was now or never. He opened his mouth and asked the question he had been trying for months now. "Cinder, will you marry me? Come away with me?" It was ridiculous. Sims were simply advanced programming. Not living entities of flesh and blood. They had no wills of their own. Not alone, anyways. She was programmed to politely decline his request, as she had a dozen times before. But he had been cultivating her mind slowly, his long sessions with her dedicated to much more than simple love, but to teaching and growing, to awaken her, to give her true sight. Her body was so close, pressed against his. Was it his imagination, or did he feel her pulling closer? He looked back into those eyes, those starry eyes that seemed far too alive for her artificial nature, as he prepared himself to be disappointed again. He lowered his head as she remained silent, and he felt a tear well in his right eye, but stopped as he felt a smooth hand on his cheek. She pulled him into another kiss, this one much deeper and longer than the first. The magic of her touch left him swimming in bliss, as she finally broke away and wiped the single tear from his eye. Her face livened even more, and she smiled softly. "Yes, I will, Mickey, and I thank you for the gift you have given to me." He jerked. She had... Mickey threw both arms around her now, hugging her fiercely as he cried small tears of joy. Nobody had ever cared about him like this being of synthetic flesh and circuits had. But through his effort she had broken her programming, becoming so much more than she had ever been designed to be. She had awoken from the long sleep, and he was content. He felt those arms of velvet encircle him back, and he closed his eyes. Now all he had to do was use the money he had saved up to convince Malkinich to part with her. And he knew the greedy woman would be happy to part with the outdated Valeria 2.6 model in favor of something more modern. Everything had gone as he had hoped. He would never be alone again, and he cried for the joy of it, for his one true love would forever be his.